There's a fine line between homage and derivative pablum that Netflix's new horror slasher, Fear Street 1994, stumbles all over in its 1 hour and 47-minute runtime. The nods to genre classics like Scream and Blair Witch are frequent and more than a little on the nose. Alas, they only serve to remind us how much better those films were, made by filmmakers with vision and style. I have to note, I haven't read the R.L. Stine books that the film was based off of, so I'm going into this review and the film trilogy with a fresh set of eyes. Some critics and plenty of fans have read the books and will watch the movies with those books in mind, but I'm basically a Fear Street virgin. So with that in mind, let's see what the movie gets wrong as a slasher flick. Some spoilers follow. Fear Street 1994 takes place in a town called Shadyside, a small American hamlet that sits next to the much wealthier, much less cursed town of Sunnyvale. Shadyside has been home to countless bizarre mass murders over the years, yet this propensity toward wanton acts of savagery hasn't done much to prepare its citizens for violence. As with so many horror movies, our cast of naive heroes is monumentally unprepared for what's to come, though they're nevertheless shockingly resilient to the impending slaughter. The only characters in this story less prepared are its bumbling villains. The premise goes something like this. Shadyside has been cursed by a witch from the 17th century, who we'll surely learn more about in Fear Street 1666, the third installment in this Netflix horror trilogy. The curse is jotted down in a goofy rhyme that details how good men are ensnared by the witch's powers and bedeviled into becoming psychopathic killers. This includes good women as well, as Fear Street 1994 is nothing if not inclusive. There are hints at certain characters being aware of the deeper mystery. A sheriff drops a note through a dilapidated doorway at one point that cryptically intones, "It's happening again," but the film's mystery is anything but mysterious. Fear Street opens with Maya Hawke's character Heather working in a mall bookstore late one night after almost everyone else has gone home. Why the bookstore is last to close up shop may be the real mystery. Or why the mall looks identical to the mall from Stranger Things 3. Though it's possible that the fact that the movie's director is married to Stranger Things co-creator Ross Duffer has something to do with it. That also helps explain Stranger Things alumni Maya Hawke's presence in the film, serving as the Drew Barrymore analog in just one of many parallels to Scream. Like the various other callbacks to Wes Craven's introspective 1996 slasher, this one only serves to remind us that the Barrymore opener was a far more frightening, far more original, and more iconic version of pretty much the exact same thing. Where Stranger Things manages to play clever homage to a number of 1980s pop fiction gems, Fear Street pales in comparison to its spooky influences. A soundtrack filled with 90s hits does its best to provoke the nostalgia centers in our brains, but the film never really feels like the 90s the way Stranger Things captures the 80s. For all its little 90s nods like stationary phones or old internet chat rooms, it could just as easily be set in 2021. After the opening slashfest, which already feels a touch muted in terms of blood and gore, we get to the meat of the story. Dina is the main protagonist, who we learn early on is heartbroken over a recent breakup with Sam. The name Sam is intentionally gender neutral, designed to make us assume that Dina is pining over a boy. Much is made of the twist that Sam's actually Samantha, as though queerness was some extraordinarily rare phenomenon in the mid-90s. Hint, it wasn't. I'm not diminishing the experience of Dina and Sam, only the film's insistence at playing it up in such a heavy-handed fashion. Show, don't tell is writing advice that applies to inclusivity and representation as much as any other aspect of a story, perhaps more so. Dina's younger brother Josh is the nerd of the group. He's been researching the witch legend and is convinced that all these inexplicable and bizarre murders are connected. His peers remain perplexingly unconvinced. Sure, tall tales are hard to believe for a reason, but a town known as the murder capital of America would surely lead to higher than usual levels of superstition among the populace. Joining Dina and Josh are hard-headed cheerleader Kate and her goofy friend Simon, polar opposites in almost every way. Kate is always serious, a natural-born leader bursting with ambition. Simon is always joking around, even when people have just been murdered. A fact that very few students at the school seem to care about. Indeed, a proposed candlelit vigil for Heather and the other murder victims is booed by Shadyside's sociopathic high school student body. They'd rather just go to the football game and forget the whole thing. Truly, the 90s were a strange time, at least in Fear Street 1994's bizarre recounting. An unfortunate accident on the way home from the football game results in Sam and her boyfriend crashing on the side of the road. Sam is injured in the crash, and while she crawls across the ground, she unwittingly disturbs the witch's grave. Bafflingly, it appears the witch was buried above ground. When she brushes up against the bones, Sam has a vision of the witch's face. This unfortunate accident sparks off the ensuing events as the ghostly hag sends her undead assassins after the unlucky teen. Sometimes the witch's curse results in random murder and mayhem. Sometimes it's more targeted. It's all a little vague. What matters is that the bad guys are coming, and thankfully, we have Nerdy Josh to drop some exposition. And hey, let's not think too much about it, shall we? Surely soon the slashy stuff will save us from this dreadfully tedious movie. What follows is about what you'd expect. The killers come for our heroes. Said heroes have an uncanny and largely undeserved knack for escaping their clutches. They quickly come to the realization that the witch is after Sam, and with no help from the cops, they take matters into their own hands. Parents are strangely absent. In fact, few adults grace the screen at all. A bus full of teens, but no bus driver. A school full of kids, with no teachers in sight. All of this, I am sad to report, is horrifically boring. The most frightening thing about Fear Street 1994 is just how tedious most of the film is. Yes, there are some good scary moments when the killers arrive, but these are remarkably few and far between. When the film's final act picks up and some killing actually happens, it's only shocking because it hasn't happened sooner. Why wait so long to start killing off characters? The film is excruciatingly bloodless for a slasher flick. The handful of murders that do occur are over in a flash, and neither very scary nor very innovative. Only one stands out, and even that felt like a little, too late. Along with no parents and no adults, there are just weird little inconsistencies. Where are all the hospital staff? Why does the killer ignore some people but goes out of its way to kill the nurse at the front desk? Or try to kill Simon when we see the others brazenly ignore everyone and focus entirely on chasing down Sam? Why do these kids keep splitting up in the dark when they know for a fact they're being pursued by bad guys? The final plan the teens come up with involves fake killing Sam to throw the killers off her scent. In one of the most preposterous ways imaginable, it's a bizarre fake suicide subplot that definitely rubbed me the wrong way, and that may come off as a bit insensitive to teens with mental health issues. I won't spoil the ending, and I can't in some ways since this is just part one of a 3-part trilogy of slasher flicks, but I will say this. While I did enjoy the final twist, I also saw it coming a mile away. That's not a huge deal. The twist in Scream wasn't entirely out of left field either, and plenty of people saw that one coming too. But Fear Street fails in so many ways compared to its most obvious inspiration that one can't help but to compare the two. For one thing, Fear Street, in an attempt to pay homage to Scream, lost Maya Hawke in its opening minutes, an actor with more personality than the rest of the cast combined. The reason that the Barrymore scene worked in Scream is that we had a pretty compelling cast of characters and actors left to carry the film. Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Skeet Ulrich, Matthew Lillard, Jamie Kennedy. Scream's cast was nowhere near as diverse, but both the actors and the script had more charm. And perhaps Fear Street's cast would be less dull with a more compelling, less derivative script. But this feels like Scream if it had been written for the CW. Perhaps more importantly, Scream was a character-driven movie with villains that actually surprised and horrified us in the end. We had to grapple at least a little bit with the dark side of humanity. To the extent Fear Street is a character-driven movie at all, it's gobsmackingly bland, only ever hinting at any sort of clever subversion of horror tropes. I'm happy that the cast is less lily-white than Scream, but Fear Street can't hide its derivative script, awful pacing, and dreary characters behind diverse casting and a queer romance. Diversity alone does not make an otherwise mediocre film good. While Get Out leaned into issues of race in twisted, often disturbing ways that helped heighten that movie's tension and fear factor, Fear Street makes no similar use of the slasher genre to say anything at all about sexuality or representation. Fear Street 1994 is entertaining at points, but mostly it's clumsily overwritten. Dina is mad at her ex-girlfriend for moving to Sunnyvale, as though it's up to a high schooler not to move when her parents do. There are several teary, melodramatic confrontations between the two that do little to grow either character, and serve mostly as filler. Sam's later confession that she's been running from the truth or some such nonsense feels forced. None of this is melodramatic enough to count as cheese, mainly because it's all painfully earnest. Slashers can be melodramatic, but that melodrama should never try so hard to be sincere. The pair's later defiance of Sam's homophobic mother, who shows up to look angry and uptight and disappears just as quickly, feels more like tacked-on queer representation by way of Karens than anything meaningful. Here's an idea. Have gay people in your slasher flick without trying so hard to let everyone know how brave it is to have gay people in your slasher flick. Activism as narrative is never a wise choice. Fear Street 1994 is also garishly overproduced. Even when it looks good, and it does, there's a polished plastic sterility about it that's missing whatever secret sauce the Duffer Brothers used to capture 80s nostalgia in Stranger Things. The costumes, at least, should transport us to the 90s, but aside from dated Letterman jackets, there's little here to anchor us in time. I mean, it's all just fine. The cinematography, the set design, the editing, everything is fine. It all looks good in a highly produced, utterly unimaginative way. The town, its denizens, the set pieces, it's all entirely forgettable. I couldn't tell one house from the next. Sunnyvale's garish mansions are cartoonishly gargantuan compared to the rundown Shadyside shacks, but the teens from each school all look and act and dress the same. None of these places feel lived in. Despite the slow pacing ostensibly designed to establish character and flesh out the world, in the end it's all dreadfully, inescapably generic. I often talk about how shaving 20 minutes from a film would help the pacing and make for an overall more enjoyable experience for audiences. But Fear Street isn't particularly long, and cutting 20 or 30 minutes wouldn't solve its most glaring problems. You can't make us care about these flat, uninteresting characters by improving the movie's glacial pacing. Even the funny man Simon is not particularly funny. Fear Street's obligatory hookup scene, which features 2 pairs out of the 5-person crew making out and 4 of the 5 teens topless, ends with Simon cracking a masturbation joke. Give me Marty from Cabin in the Woods any day of the week. At least he had something interesting to say. That the 2 pairs in question hooked up to begin with was less a matter of will they, as when will they, because, like everything else in this treacly, preachy pretend slash fest, the trajectories of these relationships are as predictable as the final twist. If you're looking for a generic slasher with generally unlikable to blasé high school-aged protagonists, a ho-hum supernatural villain, and a handful of slasher monsters that are only mildly scary at best, definitely stream Fear Street 1994 on Netflix. It checks off all the boxes. If you want to watch actually enjoyable horror slasher movies, look to the film's inspirations instead. From Scream to the Blair Witch Project to Poltergeist or Halloween, there are plenty of far better, far scarier movies to choose from. With both Fear Street 1978 and Fear Street 1666 landing later this month, I was looking forward to a trilogy of new slasher flicks. Instead, the only reason I'll tune in for the sequels is to write these reviews and hope that I'm pleasantly surprised. Fear Street 1994 has a designed by committee feel that infects everything from its casting choices to its costume design to its nostalgia-burdened plot. Far from a subversion of the genre or a fun homage to 90s horror, Fear Street 1994 is derivative, shallow, and painfully generic, playing it safe at almost every turn. Only its bloody end caps save the film from utter mediocrity. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my Fear Street review. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please like and subscribe, hit that bell, and check out my Patreon page. If you disagree with my review, hop in the comments and tell me why. I understand that there's no accounting for taste, and one man's treasure is another man's, I don't know, negative review on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Peace.